Ramani ma'am, there are some people waiting to be let into the class.
I'm not seeing them. Ask them to come up and then I will allow them. Because
Sure.
you see, you are also here. I cannot see them up here. Ask them to come up, please.
And somebody is waiting.
Good evening, David. Hello. Hi, David. Good evening. Am I audible to you, David?
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. David, I can hear you now. Good
Okay.
evening and welcome to our workshop also, David. Thank you for joining us up.
All right. Shall I go ahead and get started then?
Yes, sir. Good evening to all the participants who are here. We have David Woods from Transana, and he does not like me to introduce anything else, so I'm leaving it to him to introduce the software that is the tool Transana to us. Even I'm a layperson for it.
All right. A couple of things as we get started. First off, if you have questions as we go along, I do have a chat window open, although I don't always notice it as quickly as people might like, but please feel free to put questions into the chat and I will address them at some point. All right, hopefully you can all see my screen now. What this is showing is Transana version 4.01, which is the current release of Transana. Transana is qualitative analysis software that was specifically designed originally to allow the analysis of audio and video in a way that other qualitative packages didn't support 20 years ago when I first started working on this. To my way of thinking, there are things that Transana does with audio and video that other packages don't do. And that really is what differentiates Transana from other pieces of software that are available. So I'm going to cover three things in talking today. I'm going to talk about how one brings data into Transana. I'm going to talk about how one assigns analytic meaning to portions of data within Transana. And then I'm going to talk about how one makes sense out of coded data using the program. As I'm doing all of this, what I'd like you to be thinking about is your own qualitative methodology. How do you approach data when you're doing qualitative analysis? What are the kinds of things that you like to be able to do that help you make meaning out of the data that you're working with? And as you think about that, you can think about what are the steps that I'm showing in the program that allow you to accomplish those particular goals. And the reason that I say that is that Transana is designed to support a really wide range of qualitative methodologies. There are lots and lots of different ways that people can work with qualitative data. And what I've tried to do is build a set of tools that allows people to use the methodology that they want in the way that they want to use it. And it sometimes takes a little bit of thinking to map what your methodology is onto the tools that the software gives you to allow you to accomplish those goals. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind as we go through all of this. Okay, so Transana is designed for working with text, still image, and media data. And let me just go ahead and load a piece of data here, just so that I can show you some basic features of the program as we get started. So what I've done is I've loaded some video data right now, and let me play just a little bit of that for you.
This is where they started with, and I want it to look like that. I'm going to first flip it up. Watch what happens. Okay? Now I'm going to go back to where we started, and now I'm going to flip it down. What happens each time?
It goes to the same thing.
Okay, is the audio from that video data coming through okay? I haven't used Google Meet before and don't really know if it does a good job with that or not. Is the audio coming through?
We could hear it, but very softly.
Okay. Let me make a little bit of an adjustment.
Good morning. This is Jeanette from Ron Hunter's office.
If you can make the screen full, I think that would be visible clearly.
And I want it to look like that. I'm going to first flip it up. Watch what happens. Okay? Now I'm going to go back to where we started, and now I'm going to flip it down. What happens each time?
It goes to the same.
Was that better?
Yes, we can hear it now.
Okay, excellent. All right, so a couple of things that you might have noticed is that there's a highlight in the transcript that is matched with the video, that as the video played, that highlight moved along and stayed synchronized with the video. That's one of the important features of Transana when working with media data, is that there's a linkage between the transcript and the media window. And that linkage can be very important because it makes it easier to find what you're looking for when you're working with video data. When you're just working with video, you might have a lot that looks fairly similar, and it can be really challenging to find the bit that you want to work on in any given day just from the media file alone. But when you have a linked transcript, you can type in part of the word that you're looking for and scan through the text, find the spots that you're looking for.
And Amanda, while she was listening to the story, said, "What's symmetrical?"
And you can jump immediately to that spot so that it's easier to work with your data. One of the things that I find when I am reading articles, doing literature reviews, is there's so many articles that say we collected interviews, we recorded them, we created transcripts, and then we analyzed the transcripts. And I'm a firm believer that that is a poor methodological practice, because you gain a lot of information from the audio and the video of your data that you lose when you go to that more abstract layer of working from a transcript. You lose intonation, you can lose facial expression, you can lose pacing, you can lose how something is expressed. And that can make a huge difference really in understanding what a person is saying and what they intend with that. That I find that a transcript is not always a very good way of understanding it. And so one of the basic principles built into Transana when working with media data is that you can always get back to your original media with just a click or two. That no matter where you are in the program, you can get back and watch that source video or listen to that source audio as a way of making sure that you're understanding it exactly the way that that it's meant to be understood, and that you can understand it more accurately than when you're just working with the transcript. And so that linkage is very important. So what you see in Transana's basic windows is you see the media window, where if you're working with video, you see your video. If you're working with audio only, then that window shrinks down and just gives you an audio controller. So you can still start and stop the audio. You can still scan through it using the progress bar. There just isn't a picture because it's audio only data. You have the transcript window. This is where you can have a transcript linked to that media file. You don't have to have a transcript. There are times when it is analytically appropriate to work straight from the video without taking the time that it takes to create a transcript first. But if you have the time, working with a transcript is often preferable. There are certain analytic reasons for working without one sometimes. Usually it's that you have a limited time window to get an analysis accomplished, or that you're doing a sort of a quick analysis where you're not really going to be reviewing the data a lot. Whereas if you're working with data that you want to dive deeply into, where you plan to review that data multiple times, having a transcript makes that process go more smoothly and ends up in many cases being worth the investment of time that it takes to create. If you're working with text-only data, let me pull up a piece of data that is text-only. But here's data that is text. It's got some images in it, but it does not have a media component. If you're working with text data, that appears in the document window as well. Up above that is the visualization window. You can see that it shows you whatever coding you have applied to the data that you're working with, whether that's text data, and it shows you the coding across the characters of your text, or if it's media data, it shows you the timeline of your media file. It can show you a waveform, which is very useful sometimes for being able to see segments of what's going on, or if you're working very closely, if you're doing a methodology such as conversation analysis, where you're really looking very precisely at things, where you're for example, timing the length of pauses between words or between sentences, where it matters a lot exactly where one word starts and where it ends, then this waveform can be very helpful with that, in addition to showing you the coding that you have applied across the timeline of the media file. So the visualization window helps you understand analytic information about your data. Then in the lower right-hand corner, you have the data window. And the data window is where you do a lot of interacting with Transana to bring in data files, to organize data files, to make sense out of data files, to let the program know what piece of data you want to work with next and what kind of work you would like to do with it. And so you do a lot of interacting with your data down in the data window in the lower right-hand corner. And these four windows work together to allow you to do the analysis that you want to do of the data that you have. So to bring data into the program, excuse me, I'm ahead of myself just a little bit. When you first start the program, there are four entries in the data window. We have libraries, which is where you bring in raw information. You bring in media files, you bring in text files, and you put them into libraries just as an organizational structure. Transana was originally designed to work with very, very large collections of data. When I first started on the program, I was working with a project that had something on the order of 15,000 hours worth of video data that they wanted to analyze. And one of the problems that they had was in this huge collection of 15,000 videos, they had a lot of trouble finding the one that they were looking for. So we created this structure of libraries as a way of providing a way of organizing your data to make it easier to find what you're looking for when you bring that raw data in. You bring your data in initially, you want to be able to find the bit that you want to work on in any given day and make sense of it that way. Next is collections. When you are working with qualitative analysis with text and with audio video data, typically what you do is make relatively small selections from a relatively larger piece of data and identify what is analytically interesting about those smaller segments. So collections is a place where we put those smaller segments so that we can work with them. So that there are a variety of different analytic acts that we will talk about later that take place on the level of the bits of data that have been identified as interesting and where we know what's interesting about them. There are things that we can do to go further with that data to analyze it and be able to reach a theoretical conclusion at the end. That all takes place in this second, on the second level of collections. A part of what you do during qualitative analysis in many cases, although not all methodologies require it, but a lot of methodologies, you do coding. And in Transana, you create a set of keywords in keyword groups that allow you to define your coding scheme that you can then apply to that data as a way of making sense of it. And then once you have a bunch of data that you have coded or identified what's interesting about it in other ways, you then have a series of tools, reports and maps and graphs and other things and searches as a way of exploring that data further, of digging deeper into that data to find the meaning that there is in that data to be able to make sense out of it the way that your analysis intends. And so the fourth entry here in the data window is for searches and for the tools that you use to make sense out of your data in later phases of the analytic process. So if I want to bring data into Transana, the first thing that I do is create a library for it, if that library doesn't already exist. So I'm going to create a library that I'm just going to call demonstration. No, I'm not going to call it that. I'm going to call it workshop demo because I already have a demonstration data entry there. So I'm going to call it workshop demo. That's the place that I'm putting things that I'm bringing in during the workshop just to keep them separate from all of the other examples that I have embedded in this data set. So I've now created a library. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just right-clicking that library, and Transana gives me a list of options. If I have text-based data, I can bring that data in using the Add Document selection. If I have media-based data, if I have audio files or video files, I can bring that in with Add Episode. If I have used an online survey instrument, typically you can download your data from those online survey instruments as a spreadsheet file. And so there's a way of bringing that data into Transana. Transana will do a little bit of automatic coding on it. We'll divide it up into ways that are generally helpful for making sense out of that data. So Transana is really good with online survey data that you import as spreadsheet files. There are ways of bringing in lots of documents or lots of videos at a time. And so there are a variety of choices here. I'm going to choose Add Episode. I want to bring in a video file to demonstrate what we're doing with the program, what we can do with the program today. And I choose video. Video is more complicated to work with than text. With text, you bring in the text, there it is, your text never changes, and it's very straightforward and simple to work with. Video is more complicated to work with on a number of different levels. First off, there's the whole process of transcription. You need to come up, or excuse me, you don't need to. One of your options is to come up with a transcript, a written representation of what's in that media data. And unlike text data, transcripts change. You can listen to something multiple times and hear it differently, hear it in greater detail, hear things that you didn't hear before. I've had videos I've listened to hundreds of times that I used for interviewing potential transcribers. And one person I was interviewing typed in something that didn't match what I was expecting. But when I listened to that video, there was a quick phrase spoken in an undertone that even though I'd listened to that video hundreds of times, I had never caught that phrase. This particular job candidate heard that phrase, typed it out, and I absolutely hired that person. You can hear it differently. Your transcript, you expect your transcript to change upon multiple listenings in a way that you don't expect text data to change. And then there's just more to do with video than there is with text data. And so I'm going to demonstrate with video because I think that it's just more interesting. And if you know how to work with video, you can figure out how to work with text because it's a simpler case. So I have told Transana to add an episode, which is to say to add media data. And I'm then going to choose add a file. I'm going to go out to my data where I keep all of my videos, and I'm going to choose the one that I want to analyze, the one that I want to use for our demonstration here. And this is a mathematics lesson about geometry. And so everything that I code from this particular video, I want to have that geometry code applied to it automatically. So on bringing the data in, I'm going to give it the code geometry so that everything in this lesson has that code so that I can later on, I can differentiate this from history lessons or language lessons or science lessons or lessons about algebra. So I always want to have that code there so that I can look specifically at particular types of math lessons as I'm going. And so by applying the code at the level of the media file I bring in, I can ensure that that code is always suggested as a default code for anything created from this particular video. Transana immediately asks me if I want to create a transcript. And I have several choices here at this point. I can just type in a name and hit OK, and Transana will create me a blank transcript. I can transcribe the data in the program. You have control of the media file from the document window without ever taking your hands off the keyboard, which is very, very nice for the act of manual transcription. It makes manual transcription go as between a third and a half faster to be able to not have to take your hand off the keyboard to go over and control the media player. And there's a whole bunch of tools built into Transana, things like Autocomplete. So you can type in an abbreviation and the program will expand it out to a full word that you've defined. There are shortcut keys. You can actually define about 30 or 40 shortcut keys to be able to, instead of typing in, for example, I was working with medical data recently, and instead of typing in the names of medications that I tended to spell wrong anyway, I assigned shortcut keys to those medication names, just so I can hit the, Shift F3, and it will put in the name of a medication spelled correctly every time, and allow me to move on and deal with that more quickly. And a variety of other tools for moving around inside of the data, and all of that. So that's one option that you have, is to actually create your transcripts within Transana. It gives you a variety of tools to facilitate that process, make it go as smoothly as possible. A second option that you have is you can use an external speech recognition program. I know that Google has one. I know that Amazon has one. There's one called Otter.ai that I've been using recently that works particularly well with English. I don't know what's available for languages other than English, but if you can find something that gives you even a rough transcript, that can be very helpful as a place to start sometimes. So if you send your media file out, get it processed with speech recognition software, you can then import that speech recognition file that you get back from that software and import that as your initial transcript. You'll have to clean it up some, you'll have to fix punctuation, you'll have to fix incorrect translations, you'll have to add white space and punctuation and speaker identifiers, but it still can be a good place to start. So bringing in speech recognition transcripts is an option here. If you have somebody else do manual transcription for you, or you've transcribed a file yourself elsewhere and have that in a file, you can bring that in as well. None of you wants to watch me transcribe. It's not very interesting. It's not very educational. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in a transcript that I have already done for this video. And we'll just finesse that first step of bringing in that data, of transcribing the data that you bring in. As I've said, you can work without transcripts, but there are a number of analytic advantages to working with transcripts when you have the ability to do that. One of the things that you might notice is that there are these red marks scattered throughout the transcript. Those red marks are time codes. I can ask Transana to show me the human readable values for all of those time codes. So each of those red marks associates a particular time position in the video with a particular position in the transcript. That's what allows that highlight to move along. These time codes create that linkage between the media file and the transcript. And so adding those time codes to your file is part of the task of transcription. What I find is that when I'm doing manual transcription myself, I can apply those time codes with an accuracy of a 30th of a second, roughly. So very, very precisely. When I send data out to speech recognition software, I typically get time codes that are within a second of correct, which is okay for a rough start, but I usually have to go through and modify the time codes to make them more accurate. But those red marks serve an important function in terms of being able to handle that highlighting task, in terms of being able to click in a portion of a transcript. And you'll notice that when I click in the transcript, Transana highlights the text between two time codes. If I scroll down and click in the text, Transana highlights what is between two time codes. So those time codes actually create the boundaries of the segments that you're working with when you're working with transcribed media data. You can always add additional time codes. You can insert time codes in the middle if you want. So here we have a section that's three sentences long. If we wanted to have smaller units than that, As we come in, we want to pick just a portion of that to work with. We can always come in and add additional time codes. So I'm just going to play my video. Sorry, I have to move the cat who's sitting on my keyboard at the moment. All right.
Let's talk about that word, symmetrical.
So I've played this first sentence. I've paused at the end of that sentence. All I do is press Control T. That pairs this particular position in the video where the teacher has just finished saying that sentence with that particular spot in the transcript where I've typed that sentence. I'm going to play my next sentence.
Who can share with the group?
I missed.
Share with the group.
So I've now paused again between this sentence and the next one. Control T allows me to insert a time code. And now, instead of having those 3 sentences as a single block, I can come back.
Let's talk about that word, symmetrical. Who can share with the group? What do you think? What's your...
So I now have smaller segments that I can work with analytically and code and listen to. So that process of adding time codes is a part of the transcription process, but it's very important when working with media data. I'm just coming up to check questions. We have use episode for audio and video as well. That's correct. Transana does not differentiate between video files and audio files internally. It's exactly the same to the program. It's just a question of whether there is video to display or not. But working with audio is exactly the same as working with video in Transana. That's why you have the choice of add episode, an episode being a media file, either audio or video. It doesn't matter to Transana which one it is. Okay, let's see. So that's pretty much all there is to say about bringing data into the program. It's a matter of you create a library, you right-click a library and tell Transana what data you want to bring in. If we're looking at text data, you can bring in files in docx format, so Word files, files from Microsoft Word. You can bring in rich text format, which pretty much every word processor on the planet can export to rich text format unless it's just a plain text editor with no formatting. Rich text is an almost universal format for formatted text. Transana has its own XML file. If you are transferring data, saving transcripts and having somebody else in a different copy of Transana loading that, the XML format is slightly preferable just because when you translate from one format to another, all of the numbers, things like margins and line spacing and all of that, there are very minor conversion shifts that can occur. And so this XML format enables you to have the most precise transfer from one copy of Transana to another in terms of those kinds of things. There aren't any rounding errors that can occur when you're moving between docx or rich text format and Transana. So it has its own internal XML format, and then it can also import plain text. And so let's go ahead and choose a docx file in this case. And so in this case, we're just importing text, and Transana brings that text in the way that it needs to. Oh, okay. This was actually a transcript of a media file, which is why there are time codes in it, but I imported it as a text file, so those time codes are meaningless. Let's go ahead and close that. So that's bringing data into Transana. So next, there's the issue of assigning analytic meaning. So what you are most likely to do in most situations with most methodologies is you're likely to start creating a coding system. Now, maybe you've done some literature review and you have some sense of what codes to create from that literature review. Maybe you've done enough preliminary work that you have a sense of what codes you want to start with. But maybe you're starting from absolute scratch. Maybe you're doing, for example, grounded theory, where you start with nothing, in which case you really don't have any codes. At that point, you start watching your video, you start reading your text, you start familiarizing yourself with the data, and every time you see something interesting, you create a code in your keyword structure, and you apply that code to the media file. So let's, I'm not going to create new codes while I'm doing this. Again, that's not something that's interesting to watch. But let's say we're going through our data and we come across a particular interesting passage. Let's come down here.
It lets us do sideways flips, it lets us do up-down flips, it lets us copy pores, it lets us build a pore square.
So let's say that that particular segment of video is absolutely fascinating for our research. And we want to make we want to select this segment and assign some analytic meaning to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the codes that I've created under math lessons, and we see that they're talking about sideways flips, they're talking about up-down flips. And so I look at here, and here I see my code for up-down flip. So I'm just going to double click that code. And what you see happen, if you were paying attention, is up here in the visualization window, we now have a couple of coding bars on our data that we didn't have before. We have up-down flip, which is the code I just triggered, and we have geometry. You remember when I brought this data in, I added that geometry code as a default, so Transana has applied that to my new selection by default. So I'm now going to, I don't have a code here for sideways flip, so I'm going to add a code for sideways flip. Normally I would give it a full definition. I'm not going to take the time to do that right now. So we now have a sideways flip code, and so I'm going to double click that code as well to add that code to this selection. And you will see as I do that, that a new bar pops up in our visualization window that shows our sideways flip code as well. And I actually selected the wrong data, so I'm going to go back, reselect, and add that sideways flip in there. So the process of coding is a matter of making a selection and double clicking a code, and I can go on and I can go through my whole media file and add those codes as I go. And so that is what it takes to code an audio or video file in Transana. It's just a matter of making those selections and applying those codes. And the time codes come into play here in that when I add a code, if I just pick, for example, a single word here and apply the code to that word, I'm actually getting, what I've actually coded is the whole segment between the two closest time codes. I haven't just coded that individual word, I've coded the time-coded segment, because that's the way it works with media files, to be able to maintain that connection with the media so that when I load that latest clip, I can get that Transana uses the time codes to determine the boundaries of the clip that it's applying that code to. If I'm working with text-only data, the process is very similar. You just select the bit of text that you find, and you double click a code to apply that particular code to the particular selection that you've made in your text document. And you can see by holding your mouse over the visualization, you can just see exactly what each of these bars represents in terms of the different codes that I've applied to this document. So coding is very straightforward, very simple, just a matter of you make a selection and you double click a code and you move on. And that is very useful in many different qualitative methodologies as a way of applying meaning to a particular selection within your data and attaching that analytic meaning to the segments that it applies to in your data. But as I said earlier, Transana tries to support many, many different methodologies, and that coding process doesn't work for all methodologies. You notice when you apply a code, you don't really have a whole lot of control over things like, let's say you're using the narrative methodology. If you are doing a narrative analysis, coding is not going to really work for you, because one of the central tenets of a narrative methodology is that you're building a story. And it is the nature of stories that they have beginning, middle, and end. That the order of the way things are presented within a narrative makes a huge difference. When you're coding, you don't get any control over the order of things. So if you're doing a narrative methodology, just as one example, coding is not going to really work for you. So Transana provides a second system for identifying what is analytically interesting about data that is different than coding. So coding is great for methodologies where coding is great, but for methodologies where coding isn't really able to do what you want, it is less than ideal. So I'm going to go to an example of an analysis that I did, if I can find it. Here we go. So what I did in this case is I created a collection. A collection is simply a place to put things in Transana. Let me go ahead and load some different video. So this is an example of a combined science and math lesson where they were looking at plant growth, and they were studying science concepts such as growth and the life cycle and how plants germinate and all sorts of things like that. But they also combined it with some interesting math lessons in terms of they were taking a lot of measurements from these plants and using those measurements to describe what they were seeing scientifically. And so they got into concepts like circumference. How do you determine what is the circumference of a plant? So it got into this sort of mixture of math and science, and was a really very interesting curriculum that they were studying in this particular example. And so in this case, what we did was we wanted to tell the story of this classroom. So we created a set of collections, and we literally created clips by highlighting a section and then double clicking the collection, giving it a name, and that created a clip. So when I load that clip, what I get literally is the text that I highlighted. I get.
And you said you need to think about the circumference. Can you tell me about that so we can think along with you?
So I get the text that I highlighted. I get the media that is linked with that text as this freestanding clip object. And I can take this freestanding clip object and I can put it in a particular place in my set of collections. So I can literally put a series of video clips in exactly the order that I want to tell the story that I want to tell. That's narrative analysis. That is the narrative methodology, and you don't use coding for that. You use what we call in Transana categorization. You create a category that is theoretically meaningful. You create clips and from media files and quotes from text files. You put them into that collection. You set their order to tell the story that you want to tell. And that allows you to use a different theoretical methodology, one for which coding is really not appropriate. So Transana has this process of collections and putting clips in collections. And you can actually do very full, very detailed analyses using this particular methodology. You can So the example that I've already given is narrative. Okay, at the moment, there is occasionally the program slows down when I'm doing a presentation because what the program is doing and what it's sending out conflict. So it's taken a little bit longer than it normally does to do that last act, but we're now done with that. So let me back up. Okay, so you can do full analyses using categorization without ever doing code. I at one point was analyzing an advertising campaign, and I wanted to understand how this advertising campaign worked. And so I created a collection called Argumentation, and I just started finding interesting pieces of ads and dropping them into this Argumentation collection. I didn't really know what I was going to find. I was doing very much a grounded theory sort of approach at this point. And so I started watching all of those video clips, and I determined that there were two kinds of argumentation that I was seeing across these ads I was looking at. There was logical argumentation. People were making reasoned arguments. You should buy our product because it serves this function, it solves this problem, it does this thing that you want to do, it makes sense to buy our product in order to accomplish one of your goals. But I also saw a lot of things going on in that advertising campaign that had nothing to do with logical argumentation. All of the cool kids use our product. Our product will make you more attractive in social situations. You can use our product on the beach. Well, it was a work tool, not something I typically associate with going to the beach, but it seemed very important to them to indicate that this was a work tool that one could take to the beach. I did not think that that was a logical argument. That did not make sense to my brain as, oh, I can buy their product and work when I'm on vacation. Yay. You know, no, I didn't like that. But at any rate, there was this whole, and I eventually figured out that it was a set of arguments designed not to appeal to your brain, but to appeal to your emotions. So I created a category called emotional argumentation. I took all of the clips that I had created and I sorted them into those two categories. Those two categories seemed to capture all of the clips that I had created. And I then looked at all of my logical argumentation clips and created additional subcategories. There were some about ease of use. There were some about particular kinds of functionality. There were some about the power of the tool that we were using. And those were the arguments. And then under functionality, there were a couple of different kinds of functionality. And so I took each of these blue items is a clip. You can see that in the logical argumentations for the, and this was fairly early on in the process that I took this snapshot of the data. You can see that, in fact, the first few ads that I had were making a lot of argumentation about video functionality. That this tool was, they were trying to make the argument that their tool was superior if you were working with video. And if you just look at all of the logical arguments that you can see that this functionality video category that I created has the most evidence for it, that that's really most of the argument that I had made when I had done only the first two or three pieces of the first two or three ads that I was looking at. That the major argument they were making was about video processing. And that under emotional argumentation, there were lots of different categories, lots of different subcategories, and a lot more emotional argumentation than logical argumentation was being used. You can see that, in fact, there are many more ads represented here. So one of the conclusions that led me to, even fairly early on, was that this ad campaign was not really designed to appeal to your brain. There was much more emotional argumentation going on than there was logical argumentation. And in fact, when I really drilled into it, a lot of the arguments that they were making were in fact factually incorrect in terms of some of the arguments that they were trying to make. So I was able to basically use my collection structure as a way each nested collection represented a piece of my theory. It represented a piece of what I understood about that data, what I had learned from that data to understand what that data had to tell me. So my collections were theoretical constructs, and the clips that I used in creating those collections were the evidence for that theory. And the evidence was all divided up in terms of which of these constructs it belonged in. So that is a separate way of working with data that that works in a different set of circumstance. There are some qualitative methodologies where coding is the obvious solution. There are some qualitative methodologies where categorization is the more logical solution. There are some qualitative methodologies, such as grounded theory, that you can pursue with either and achieve the same results. And so the point is that Transana is flexible. It provides you with tools that allow you to work the way that you want to work, that fit your methodology, that fit your personality. I've worked with hundreds of researchers over the 20 years that I've been working on Transana, and I've found that no two researchers work exactly the same way, that there's an element of personal style or personal preference that goes into how one approaches data. So Transana gives you different tools that fit different personalities. I have also found in my own work that I use different tools at different times in the analysis. So I'm doing a big analysis of medical data right now. And we've asked a series of qualitative questions. We're making sense out of that data. And I'm fairly far along in writing a paper for a part of that study. And what I saw myself doing in all of that was I first approached the data with coding. I didn't really know where the data was going to go. I didn't know what it would have to say. So I created codes that identified what was interesting about each of the segments that I was looking at. And I just created a whole bunch of clips with codes. I then looked at Transana's reports and looked at what codes did I use a lot, because those were the things that were most important to the participants in the study in talking about the different things that we were talking about, in answering the different questions I was asking. And I then created, what I realized was that those codes that had the most frequent use were the basis for my forming themes. And so I started forming those themes based on the coding that I had done. I represented each theme as a category, and I moved my coded clips into those categories based on the coding that I had done. So I shifted from a coding-based approach to a category-based approach as I understood the data better, as I moved from not really knowing what the data had to tell me to being to the point where I was able to develop the themes, see what was most important to my participants, and develop the themes that were embedded in their responses. And those themes were better represented as categories than they were as codes. So I made a shift over time from coding to categorization to represent the maturity of my understanding of the data. And, not everybody works that way. I don't work that way in every bit of research or study that I do, but in that particular example where the data was very, very complicated and I, not having a medical background, was a little bit out of my element, it was very useful to me to combine those two techniques to be able to create a database that really clearly represents the argument that I'm making about what we learned from this particular exercise. So that it's mostly a quantitative team that I'm working with. Some of you may recognize the challenges of being a qualitative researcher working with a mostly quantitative team. And I was able to organize my data in collections in Transana so that when I present it to the rest of my team, it will be very, very clear to them exactly how I reached the conclusions that I did and the strength of the evidence behind the conclusions that I have reached. That's all very clearly spelled out in the data because of the way I organized it. The other thing that I should say is that there's actually, I've presented coding and categorization as very, very different in my talk so far. they're not actually as different in reality as I have presented them. It's easier to teach. It's easier to describe by describing them as truly different things. But if you take a coded selection and put it into a collection, then you've categorized it. You moved from coding to categorization. If you take a categorized clip and apply some codes to it, then you move from categorization to coding. Every single clip I have in my database for that project I was describing is both coded and categorized, and I use the techniques for both of those methodologies, both of those data approaches, if you will, because that coding and categorization are not methodologies. They are analytic moves that one makes within the context of a methodology. But I have both of those going on, and if I need to do something where I'm looking at how coding went across different categories, I can do coding-based moves and looking at reports. If I need to do something where categories fit the model better, differentiate between the different themes that I'm writing about in my results chapter and my results section, then I can do category-based things. But the same data underlies both of those approaches. They're just slightly different ways of looking at the data that have slightly different advantages. Coding works better in some circumstances. Categorization works better in other circumstances. That's why there are these two separate approaches, is they do have different strengths and weaknesses. And I can use both of them to be able to take an individual question that I come up with as I'm writing and answer that question with the best set of tools to answer that particular question using the combination of coding and categorization. Is that sufficiently clear? Does that make sense? The point is that Transana tries to be really, really flexible to let you work the way you need to work as you're doing your analysis. And the things that drive that are your methodology, certainly, your personal style and how your brain works with data, absolutely, and where you are in the process of analysis, how well you understand your data, because there are different needs to answering questions when you understand your data really well as compared to the beginning stages where you don't. Sufficiently clear, or do people have questions?
Till here it is clear, David.
Yes, can you say that again?
Here it is fine. So I have to ask the other participants if they have some questions.
Yes, ma'am. One question. Can we import R or Python data in Transana, or vice versa? Export it to Python or R?
Sir, the question is, are we planning to integrate with R and Python platforms also in Transana right now, or no?
I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with the audio. It's not coming through too clearly. Can you ask that again?
Okay, what he's asking you is that, like, there are collaborative projects going on between collaborator R Python, right? So are there any future collaborations with introducing R platform or Python also into Transana? That's what he's asking.
There's not currently a plan of bringing R Python specifically into Transana. Transana does, however, have a tool called Analytic Data Export. So you can take your qualitative data and export it to a tab delimited text file, which you can then import into R Python or SAS or SPSS or Excel or a variety of other tools, so that you can import your qualitative data, export it from Transana into those other tools, and do mixed methods analysis with them. So the way I think about it is I see Transana as a data provider. It's a way of taking your data and sorting it and organizing it and categorizing it. And you can then take that organization and that categorization and feed that to more quantitatively oriented programs to do those kinds of activities. It's not integrated within Transana, because there's a finite amount of time in any given week, and I just don't have time to make Transana do absolutely everything that people have asked about. But the current state of the art is to use analytic data export to export your quantitative data in a form that you can import into other tools to be able to go on to do those mixed methods kinds of activities. I see a question in the chat. Does Transana work with CSV files? The answer is yes. That if you have CSV files, specifically import spreadsheet data is the ticket there. And again, most of those CSV files that I work with, at least, have come from online questionnaire tools where you can ask open-ended questions and import them into Transana to be able to do qualitative analysis of the open-ended text portion of those surveys. But Transana provides tools during spreadsheet import that allow you to pick some of your quantitative questions and use those as providing initial codes so that you can divide your data up along some of the quantitative categories as a way of doing some preparation for qualitative analysis, bringing that CSV data into the program. Okay, so we are about halfway through our time, and I'm about a third of the way through my outline, so I need to move on at this point. I have mentioned that Transana can do analysis of still images as well, and so let me just show you that real quickly. Transana treats still images differently than it treats media data and text data, because still image data is by its very nature a little bit different than those. With text data and with media data, you've got a large whole and you're looking at very small selections within that larger whole. And the relationship between what you're coding and the bigger piece of data is not really something that you're looking at the whole time. With still images, the relationship between what is analytically interesting that you want to code and the image as a whole is different. That often you need to see the whole image, or at least larger pieces of the image that you're coding, to be able to make sense out of it. And so in Transana, when you're working with still images, it tends to be that you show the whole image, although you can also zoom in and show only part of an image if that's what you want to do. But then with Transana, you can apply coding shapes that help you explain what is interesting, or that help draw the user's attention to what is analytically interesting about the image that you're trying to analyze. So this is a photograph taken at the British Museum on a trip to London. It was showing a particular sculpture. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting was that, in fact, this particular sculpture showed an animal with 5 legs. And that, in fact, 3 of the legs were represented in a single representation, but that right front leg had a duplicate representation that basically was visible differently depending on where you were standing. Where I took this photograph, you could see both representations. Had I moved to my right, the left-hand version of that leg would have been obscured. Had I moved to my left to stand in front of the statue, the right-hand representation would have been obscured. So this was an artistic attempt to make visible all 4 legs, even from when the sculpture was viewed from different angles. And so I coded that up as a way of drawing the analyst's attention to that duplicate leg and contrast that with the 3 legs that were not duplicated, as just a way of representing what I thought was most important about that particular point that I wanted to make about this particular sculpture. I then did go through my slides and find another example, not as good a photograph, but another example of that same duplicate representation of the right front leg, And so the form here was clearly more than just a single artist's attempt to struggle with a problem of representation. It was, in fact, a more culture-wide way that sculptures were done at the time. And so one can go on and make a variety of arguments about that, depending on how much one knows about that particular time period and about artistic representation and a whole bunch of stuff that is a bit beyond my my knowledge base. And so you can do coding of still images in Transana as well. Transana gives you the ability to capture still images from video. And so you can capture images from your data as a way of emphasizing particular analytic points. And again, if I go to one of my examples, you can see that I have a whole bunch of video clips here, but I have one still image captured from the video that students were learning about symmetry, and the student identified lines of symmetry that were horizontal and vertical, which are correct. Those are lines of symmetry. The student also identified 2 diagonal lines of symmetry, and that was not correct. Those diagonal lines are not symmetrical. And so, again, I used coding and coding shapes, in this case lines, to emphasize what the student correctly understood and what misconceptions the student had about the concept that they were in the middle of learning, which was helpful in terms of curriculum design. It helps to be able to see what kinds of mistakes students make, what kinds of things they misunderstand as you go along, so that you can design it into the lesson to address those misunderstandings. But this image describes what the student misunderstood better than a long text paragraph might. It captures it very simply and very clearly. It's a nice representation of that understanding and lack of understanding. And because it was there in the video, I was able to capture that screen. I was able to zoom in on the screen to focus just on that portion. I was able to code it in a way that made sense. And I was actually able to drop that coded screenshot into a transcript that fit that particular portion of the video to further highlight that portion as the researcher was looking at the implementation of their curriculum. Here it was just at the right time, this picture that showed what this particular student was struggling with in terms of understanding. I do see another question in the chat. Does Transana work with streaming media data as well? The answer is no. Transana does not work with streaming data. And the reason for that is that streaming data is too ephemeral. When you're working with media data, one of the things that you do is you come back to that data later and review it. And when you have streaming data, you can't count on that data still being available. So Transana works on files that you have in your possession on your hard drive that you have control over, because then you know that your data is not going to disappear. Streaming data, I find, less reliable. For example, when I record something, I typically post it for about 2 weeks, and then I run out of space and I take it down. And if you encoded that as streaming data, you'd have lost what the video underlying your work. So Transana does not work with streaming data, and that is intentional. It is relatively easy to capture streaming data and convert it to a file on your hard drive. There are, well, first off, you can always talk to the content creator and get an official copy of it, which legally speaking is the best approach. But there are also tools that allow you to do screen scraping, and there are tools that allow you to download streamed files and a whole host of other things. So it's not that difficult to capture the data that you're looking for. The other thing is that Transana needs data to be very responsive. That if you may need to load a file, seek 2 hours into that file, and play a 15-second segment, you need that to happen nearly immediately. And I find most streaming services take too long. That it can take 30 seconds or 45 seconds to go through that whole process of loading and seeking deep into and playing. And that's just too disruptive to the analytic process. So no on streaming. So there's a comment in the chat that Transana might well be really useful for images, for medical images, such as cancer screening tests, COVID tests, and such. I agree. I think that Transana's coding shapes are relatively unique. I haven't looked at all qualitative software, but a lot of qualitative software, you sort of code along the edges and look for intersections, whereas Transana, you draw the physical shape on the image, and I think that is a preferable approach to dealing with images. Another thing about Transana that I really like is that it has the capacity to allow you to explore your images. So, for example, if we really wanted to emphasize things, we could actually, this is temporary, so we'd explore what are the legs that are okay, as shown by the green rectangles, by hiding the ones that are duplicates, and we can then choose to hide the ones that are okay and go to the ones that are duplicates and show those. I have actually used this technique in presentations as well. Let me just see if I have that with me. I do. When I want to make particular points about this, I can actually flash the coding on the screen that draws people's attention to a particular part of this image that make it more obvious and more visible, so that there's a lot that Transana can do to emphasize, and those coding shapes work really well for a number of different purposes. And I absolutely agree with you that being able to highlight what is significant in medical images using those coding shapes would be a really good teaching tool, because I often look at x-rays and scans and those kinds of things and am baffled by what it is that the professionals are seeing, because it all just looks like a bunch of gray blobs to me. And so if you can highlight those things using the coding shapes, that's an excellent way of being able to draw somebody's attention to a particular portion of an image to help them see things in a particular way. So I absolutely agree with you on that comment. Okay. One other thing that I want to emphasize is, as you're doing your work, you can always attach notes to everything that you create in Transana. So when you create a collection that serves a particular analytic purpose that is designed to capture a particular type of meaning, you can put a note on that collection that describes the function of that collection, the purpose of that collection. And as your analysis goes, if you find a particular concept's meaning change, you can document in a note not what the new understanding is, but you can document the old understanding, the original understanding, and then I always drop a timestamp in and document the new understanding. So I used to think that, now I think this, and the reason that my thinking changed was because of this thing that I saw, or this event that occurred, or this article that I read. You can use the notes to document why you changed your thinking, which is a better representation of capturing your qualitative research process, which can be really important during your write-up to help you gain that trustworthiness that we all seek as people who write up qualitative data. So you can add notes to collections to describe how they're used and how that use changes. You can attach notes to quotes and to clips and to snapshots. Why did I code this a particular way? Why did I include one code and exclude another code? Why did I start where I did? Why did I end where I did? Why did I not include this other portion that's related? All of that can go into these notes that you attach to the different parts of your data as analytic memos, as ways of documenting your analytic process. So Transana has lots of writing tools built in to allow you to capture your work as you go along. It then provides a tool called the Notes Browser that brings all of your notes together into a single tool that allows you to jump from one note to the next, look for connections. It allows you to search for particular text that might be used across notes to identify notes that are connected to each other. And so this tool allows you to make sense of your notes that tend to be a little bit scattered all across your database. It's nice to have them brought together in a single place so that you can make some of the connections that one needs to. Are notes similar to memos in other software? Absolutely. Notes are very similar to memos in other software. It's just a slightly different name for it. But in terms of writing tools, there's another thing that I do in Transana. I always, when I start a project, create a library called research journals. Research journals are where I do my analytic writing as I go. Now, I do my analytic memos on the individual pieces of data because that makes sense to me that I'm writing a memo connected with a particular piece of data, but I also do larger pieces of analytic writing. I have a daily progress log. Every day when I go into my data and do some work, I make notes in my daily progress note. Today, I looked at these particular pieces of data. I looked at this particular theme. I did coding of this particular type. I got from A through J, and so tomorrow I need to start with K. Whatever notes I need to make that makes sense out of what I'm doing. So I keep a research journal of my daily progress. If Transana has a multi-user version where a whole team of people can work on the same data at the same time, even if they're not in the same location, and that the daily progress log is a critical communication tool for collaborative analysis as well, because each person mentions what they do. If you have a question, I see that you coded these particular bits of data this particular way. I interpret it differently. What's your reasoning? Here's what I think. What do you think? Let's work out and reach consensus about that. You can ask those kinds of questions in daily progress. So it's a really nice collaborative tool. I did this. Can somebody, I don't have time to transcribe this other file. Can somebody else pick that up? Those kinds of things. I make notes about research questions. I come into a study with particular research questions. It's nice to have a research journal for each research question. And maybe when I'm transcribing, I notice, gee, look back at this particular piece of data because the section from 20 minutes to 30 minutes has some specific things to do with this research question. Or I've just coded 6 different things to this theme. Can somebody else look at that and see if they agree with the way I've coded it? Or I had an interesting insight and I was looking at these 3 clips, and you can actually put links to those clips in the research journal. I looked at, when I saw these 3 clips, it helped me think about this in a different way. And I wanted to, it's a way of documenting that shift in your thinking. I actually do my preliminary drafts of methodologies sections and results sections in Transana. Because when I'm writing a results section, every time I put a quote into my results writing, I put a link to that quote, because then I can click that link, I can watch that video, I can read that text, I can go to the context where that quote was taken from and see what happened right before, what happened right after, to make sure that I'm reflecting my participants and my data accurately. If I find things that conflict, I can then look at both of those pieces with just a click to get to them and make sure that I can work out that conflict in a good way. And so I do now I don't do all of my analytic writing in Transana. It's not that sophisticated a word processor, but I do my preliminary drafts in the tool. I then export them and move them to a word processor to finish them up. But I do preliminary writing there specifically so that I can make those links to my data and stay connected with my data all the way from bringing the data in and doing my transcription through the qualitative write-up at the end. When I'm putting my theory together, I can still be just a click away from my data and really, really close to that data, really able to make sense of that data. So these larger research journals are really pieces of larger scale writing where I'm writing across many different bits of data, across many different themes, across many different categories and codes, and I'm trying to put things together, make sense of things. That's what research journals do for me. Do you have paraphrasing tools in Transana? When you are doing a transcript in Transana, that transcript can take many, many different forms. And so one of the forms of transcription one can do is essentially a paraphrased transcript. You don't have to do a verbatim transcript and capture every word. You can create a transcript that just connects the major concept of each section that you separate by time codes and do a paraphrased transcript like that. You can do paraphrasing in notes as well. If you create a clip or create a quote out of text, you can paraphrase that in the notes. You can actually, if you want to, if you have a note here, the note may start with the original text. If you don't want to keep the original text, you can actually edit the note at the quote level or the clip level. You can edit the transcript or the text to paraphrase it there or to add comments there that do your paraphrasing. And that will not affect your source document or your source transcript if you do it at the level of the selection. At the level of the quote or the clip, you can change the text there in Transana to reflect a way that you want to see it slightly differently. To go the next step, you can do a whole host of other things with transcripts. For example, you can do multiple languages represented in multiple transcripts. So if I was working with a collaborator who only spoke French, I could create an English transcript and a French translation, and that gives that particular researcher access to my data in a language that they understand if they don't understand the source language. I can do things like I can transcribe what is said in one transcript, but gestures and motions and behavior.
The moment that made me switch from PC to a Mac. I'm sleeping. I have to be up.
So I can create a gestural transcript, a transcript based on movement rather than a transcript based on something verbatim. I can create a descriptive transcript, a transcript that, again, we have one here. This particular video was a slideshow video, so there was spoken text and there were images behind it. This was a newscast from the BBC, and so they did this series of images with a voiceover, and that was how they did their presentation. I actually was able to do a description of each of the slides, but I then took that one better and actually did a screen capture. This takes a little bit longer to load because it's a series of images. It's a lot of images that ends up being a lot of data, so it takes some time to load. So I was actually able to create an image-based transcript, if you will, so an image-based representation of the data. And that was actually ended up being really interesting because this was a BBC piece, so a piece that originated in the UK about the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Every image that they had related to the home mortgage portion of the crisis. This image, you notice it's U.S. home auction. It's a ranch-style house that's common in the U.S. and relatively rare in the U.K., from my understanding. So their images all pointed to the U.S. as the source of that part of the economic crisis. And they never said it in the text. They never said it out loud, but the images told a story that the text didn't. And by doing this screen capture transcript, I was able to capture that inference in the data that I wouldn't have caught otherwise. There's a study where the researcher was looking at student-produced documentary films, and she was really interested in the idea of students producing. If she wanted to look at the quality of these films, so she looked at it from the point of view of the director, from the point of view of the sound engineer, from the point of view of the video editor, and the point of view of the cinematographer. She created 4 transcripts to represent 4 different analytic views of a single video file, and was able to demonstrate a very, very sophisticated level of filmmaking here that would not have been obvious to in a lot of other circumstances. And so she used multiple simultaneous transcripts to demonstrate very, very sophisticated work and thinking on a group of students who were referred to this program in the first place because they were considered academically at risk and not very bright. And what she was able to demonstrate was that when you put them in a different context, one that was more relevant to their life and their skills, that in fact they were able to excel and do very, very complex and sophisticated work, that it was in fact, the curriculum of the English course rather than the students that was deficient in this particular case. You may have talked about discourse analysis or conversation analysis in part of your workshop. Transana is able to do Jeffersonian transcription. Transana embeds in the transcript editor some characters that are not easily accessible from the keyboard that are central to Jeffersonian transcription. Transana can do things like time pauses, which is again essential to Jeffersonian transcript to support conversation analysis, discourse analysis, some of those transcription-based methodologies. Long answer to what you thought was a short question. Transana allows you to do lots and lots of very flexible things in terms of expressing what it is you see in the data in whatever way you want to see in the data. And you can do that through transcription in some cases, through coding in some cases, through capturing still images, either in a transcript or as snapshots in some instances. Lots of different tools all come together to allow you to describe the data exactly the way you want to view the data exactly the way you want to meet your analytic needs, and to find that balancing point between being able to find what you're looking for in the data where a transcript helps, but not having infinite time and infinite resources, so you can't do a verbatim transcript of everything that you're working with, and therefore have a desire to create a transcript that paraphrases things. So yeah, lots of tools for working lots of different ways. Pretty much the vast majority of things you can think of, there's probably a way of doing it somehow in Transana. Okay, so we finished up writing. Running out of time. I have a big 5 minutes left to show you Transana's reports. Transana offers lots of different kinds of reports. Transana offers text-based reports. Let's take a particular collection. I've gathered together a group of clips that are all related to each other. I want to see how those clips fit together. I can ask for a collection report. Transana gathers all of those clips. You'll see each clip is a hyperlink. If I click that clip, Transana loads that clip in the main interface and I can watch the video. It shows me that clip's transcript. It shows me that clip's coding. It does that for all of the clips that were gathered together. It shows me the note on my collection that tells me what the function of that collection is. It shows me the notes for all of my clips, which in this case, I don't particularly have. It shows me the image that I brought into this collection to help explain that symmetry stuff that I was talking about earlier. It gives me a summary at the end of all of the codes gathered together in this particular collection. So stuff that's gathered here, what other codes go along with it. And that's very useful. Sometimes it shows you where you have a lot of overlap, but it also shows you where you lack overlap. So I was doing, I described taking coded clips and putting them in collections to represent the themes of my article. I did this report and looked at the summaries to prove to myself that my themes were generally very separate from each other, that there was not a lot of other coding that went along with the central codes behind my themes. Shows you a pretty little bar chart, which is very nice. You can also, so that was of a collection. So that's all the stuff gathered together, regardless of where it came from. It was thematically similar. I can also take a piece of source data, and I can look, in this case, I'm going to choose a keyword map rather than a text report. It takes the same data, but it presents it visually. This is everywhere this particular source video was used across all of my collections, across all of my data, and I was able to organize it in a particular way to tell a particular story. When we look at this map, we see that the data that I was looking at occurred in 3 distinct phases, that something was happening for the first 8 minutes, something different was happening from 8 to 13, and then from 13 on, a third thing was happening. But I was able to take that same data and reorganize it using a filter to reorganize it and ask a different analytic question. So this asks the question of what was the overall organization, what were the phases of what was going on in this. But I can ask a different question, what was happening specifically in the chat, and we see that there was this very frequent activity that faded out over time. This was, you see by the keyword name, trying to be inappropriate. There were a group of people trying to be inappropriate, performing for the researcher. There was another group of people using a couple of different responses to try and get them to focus on the gameplay that I was recording rather than on being obnoxious for the researcher. And we spread that out. And you could actually look at the interplay between those two types. You can actually click on each bar in one of these visual reports. And again, Transana loads the clip underlying that bar. So it looks at the coding, looks at where that coding came from, and shows you that video in the underlying interface as a way of allowing you to see the context of particular comments and make sense out of your data if you see something that doesn't quite make sense or you want to make sure you understand things correctly. I have a collection here of all of the questions that were asked in US presidential debates in 3 election cycles, 2008, 2012, 2016. For each of those election cycles, I did a word frequency report. I asked Transana what were the most common words. I grouped word variations together, so they were counted together. And I looked at word clouds as a quick and dirty summary. I was able to do an analysis of how the moderators asked different questions of the candidates in 2016 than they had in 2008, 2012, and to demonstrate that difference visually using one of Transana's reports, in that case, the word frequency report with the word cloud visualization. And so my phone never rings except when I'm doing a presentation. So Transana offers a whole host of reports that also allow you to make sense out of your data and to understand that data in different ways. So I have used up my allotted time. Thank you very much for being here. I actually could have gone another hour and shown you some other cool stuff, but as usual, I have run out of time. If any of you have questions that you would like to ask, I'm happy to stay and answer questions as long as you'd like to, but I understand it's getting fairly late over where you are. So thank you all very much for coming. I hope that I've given you a good sense of how Transana works and what Transana can do. I guess the other thing that I would say is that you can always go to the website.
I think he is busy with something, and that's why he has just left without me even thanking him for that. So I think he has given us some kind of a glimpse about what Transana is all about. Yes, as she is taking care of her responsibility. Thank you, Yesha. I think out of 50, 35, 15 are missing. I mean, some of them just left out I should say, the session also in between. That's fine. That's okay for me. Now, here, they have, I mean, in that sense, you can see that, yes, the traditional the quali methodologies, have to be grilled down somehow at the coding level and then to be carried over. Now, this is something that I would be taking care, and I want all of you to make these observations also. And that is the reason why I wanted this particular session to be there, so that we are able to understand actually as to what is happening with that particular tool basically, and what way. So you see, I feel that this particular tool is much more comfortable with I would say visual analysis, image analysis, and he has also taken care for a lot of other things also, wherein thank you, David, for joining us again. You are on mute, David. You can unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I accidentally shut down my browser. I forgot Google is a browser-based meeting tool, whereas I'm used to tools that are not browser-based. So I shut down the browser without even thinking about it. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thing is that I wanted to ask you a question. In Transana, I see that emphasis or focus is more on analysis of the documents, in other words, textual analysis, and then narrative analysis. Then you have very nicely, introduced to us with the conversational analysis. What about discourse and discursive analysis also in Transana?
I'm afraid I don't necessarily know the subtleties of those particular methodologies. They're not methodologies I was trained in or have ever used. So I'm not sure I can answer that question particularly well. But if you can describe to me what you would like to be able to do, I might be able to point you to how one would accomplish that particular task in Transana.
Thing is that in discursive and discourse, we focus more on, let's say, in discourse, what happens is that two individuals, language is given the importance, number two, and the way you are interacting with each other in the language. So I see that it is one step ahead of conversational analysis for us. In discourse, it is intersubjectivity, in the sense there are multiple subjects who are there and they are interacting with each other towards that, using that particular language. So in language, we are talking about meaning and the references also side by side. I hope I've been able to give you in nutshell the differences between both of them.
Right. So I would start in that particular approach with a good, fairly careful transcript, but then I would create clips and code them. I would code them for which participants were involved, so that you could look at how pairs of individuals interact with each other. One of the things I didn't have time to show was the whole search tool and search matrix interface, so that you could search on pairs of individuals, for example, to see if pairs of individuals interacted in different ways. You could create a coding scheme to describe both the topics of conversation, but also the types of interactions that you're seeing. So you would certainly have a set of intersubjectivity codes related to the types of interactions that you have, and you would code each of those interactions, and you would then use Transana's reports and maps to look at how those codes are laid out across the timelines of videos. So you might be able to look, for example, at patterns of how conversation changes over time. both within a single conversation, but also Transana has a tool that allows you to look at across the course of multiple videos, are there patterns in coding that persist or change across time? So let's go to the multi-line. This takes, in this particular example, it's 6 videos that happened in sequence, and you can actually see very clearly the changes in the pattern of coding across these 6 videos that show change in behavior over time. In terms of this green bar becomes shorter and shorter, becomes too short and gets adjusted. And the intermix of other lines, you can see by the 6th video, there's much more back and forth between the different.
David, excuse me,
Yes.
David, can you please share your screen also so that we can see whatever you're talking about? Because you're not sharing the screen, so it
Yeah.
is just verbally I'm able to connect with you.
Yeah, we would like to see the results and reports.
Yep.
Yes, thank you, David. That is what we wanted to say. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so here you can see across the course of 6 videos, you can see a change in behavior over time. This green line represents data collection, and you can see that in the first, half the time was spent on data collection. That was too much. Didn't allow for the other goals. So that gets shorter and shorter and shorter. Session 4 didn't collect enough data, so there was an adjustment back to get the data you need without taking up too much time. You can see different activities start to creep in the 2nd and 3rd sessions. And by this 5th session, this blue line, which is counseling activities, takes up. These were purportedly counseling sessions, and you see in the first couple of sessions there wasn't much counseling activity going on, and that increased. You can see the intermix between the different categories. By this 6th session, there's much more intermix, and when we played each of those different sections and when we played the session overall, we saw a much more natural conversation. We saw the conversation flow much more smoothly. We actually saw the session end early because they had accomplished what they wanted to. So this was a much better session. You could actually see in the coding across time the improvement of a particular individual's skill. And so you might use something like this to characterize your interactions and see if there is a change in interactions both across the timeline of each individual video. Do people start interacting and interact one way early in a conversation and it changes till later in the conversation, but also do they interact differently in early conversations versus later conversations between the same pairs of people? So that might be another way that you could explore that sort of intersubjectivity and interactional style through coding and through looking across multiple videos of conversation as well as across timelines of individual conversations to look for changes in patterns of behavior as represented by the coding that you have applied to the videos that you've collected.
Wow, thank you, David. That was a wonderful way you have showcased to us the importance of Transana. And really, this is a wonderful analysis. Thank you. And one more thing, I was observing that in Transana, we are focusing more on image analysis, textual analysis, or the coding. What about the traditional qualitative methodologies like focus group, phenomenology? That is also being again, I would say coded only, and then you're proceeding further for the analysis?
For phenomenology in particular, I've seen it implemented a number of different ways. As I say, different people have different preferences. I know that for some people, they like to create categories. They like to create collections around some of the different phenomena that they observe, around some of the different categories of behavior or categories of whatever it is that they're studying. And they use a primarily collection-oriented approach. I've also seen people handle that same task using coding. And again, there isn't necessarily a direct one-to-one mapping of methodology to the tools that Transana offers. That's really left up to the individual researcher to figure out how Transana's tools map both to their methodology and their particular way of thinking. And so something like phenomenology can be accomplished through coding. It can also be accomplished through categorization. It depends on, to some extent, what is being studied, to some extent, which of several different phenomenological schools one is approaching, but it also depends very much on the personal style of the researcher, the way their brain works and how they wrap their understanding around data, and whether coding works better for them or categorization works better for them. One of the ways that I characterize it is that coding tends to be much more abstract, that you can apply coding with less analytic thought. You just come up with a category name, apply it quickly, and move on and figure out later what it all means. Whereas with categorization, it takes a little bit more analytic thought up front to determine what your category is, what you want to name it, to determine what you want to name your clip in terms of how it fits into that category. And so categorization has the analytic thinking occur a little bit more up front, and then it tends to be a little bit more visual in terms of you can open your different collections and see how much evidence there is for each of these, instead of having to do searches on different codes or run reports on different bits of your data to be able to see what coding is more or less present. But really, the tools that Transana provides can be used very flexibly to implement different methodologies. And I've seen people approach data very, very differently, even under the same methodology, and achieve very successful results. I shy away from saying, oh, if you're doing phenomenology, you ought to do it this way. And if you're doing grounded theory, you ought to do it this way. Really, with narrative analysis, I can say that a little bit more definitively because of that concept of order. And there is order in categorization where there isn't order in coding. But other than that, methodologically, you can generally accomplish what you want to accomplish a couple of different ways in Transana, and it's very much a matter of figuring out what's going to work best for you.
Thank you, David. Ashutosh, sir, you wanted to ask a question? Please,
Yeah,
David,
ma'am.
sir.
I just want to ask from David. I'm audible?
Yep.
Yeah. Good evening, sir. My question is, once we do our analysis and then when we finalize our results, Transana has a facility to make a diagram how phenomenology develop and all. Like and we go for another third-party tool to express our results. How can we present result in this to report results of our analysis?
Transana does not have the sort of network mapping tool that I know a couple of other packages have that try and create that overall graphic. Those kinds of tools I find relatively difficult to wrap my brain around. I don't find them particularly helpful, and that has influenced my not really being willing to devote a whole lot of time to putting them into Transana. So in essence, your overall structure can be represented in terms of the collection structure that you've laid out, but you would then have to go that extra step of creating a visual representation for publication to map that out in a way that makes sense to you. In addition, the reports show you different levels of coding, but if you wanted to create a sort of a network map or some kind of visual representation of how those codes were related to each other, you would need to do that in a little bit more customized drawing tool or network mapping tool or mind mapping tool, which I know that there are a number of really good ones out there, to be able to take that final step to present things the way you would want to in publication. And again, some of that is just that there are many different ways to accomplish that, and I can't implement all of them, and there are existing tools that accomplish that in lots of different ways. I do see a question in the chat. Can teams work at different locations? Transana has a multi-user version that allows teams across geographic locations to work together on the same data at the same time. As you can imagine, that's technically a little more challenging to set up than just installing a program on your own computer and running data that you have stored locally. So definitely consult with your IT support before purchasing the multi-user version. But yeah, I've done analyses where one of the researchers was in South Africa, a second of the researchers was in Leeds in England, and I was working from the States. The three of us did a collaborative analysis across those kinds of distances in a way that worked really, really well, because we were able to share data using Transana's multi-user version, and it worked really, really beautifully to do that. So, so with the proper IT support in setting up the tools that one needs to share data at that kind of scale, Transana has a model that works really, really well for that. And then the second question was about academic pricing. I find that nearly 100% of our sales are to academics, so it doesn't make sense to me to have a separate academic price that I then give to everybody. So Transana's prices are posted on the website. Those are our prices. The assumption is that you're an academic if you're using Transana, because that's what the data shows me. And so the price is the price.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, David. I think that's the questions that we had for the day today. And I really appreciate you joining us up in a very short notice, number 2. Number 3, yes, the participants would be going through the trial version of Transana, because I can see what is the depth of using Transana for narrative analysis. And narrative analysis, earlier it was, I would say, if I look at the history of it, more popular in medical schools. However, now with the management and business studies coming and taking up their popularity, again, this one is going to be a very useful for them to look at it, because I have seen the way you have introduced us to the image analysis also. So, lot of flyers, brochures, magazines, annual reports are also available, and one can really enter into the depth of analyzing those images in a chronological manner. Now, the question that I wanted to ask you while you were showcasing us the image analysis is the fact that is there any comparative numerical value also when I'm comparing different images in Transana?
No, I haven't done anything with trying to quantify information from images. One of the ways that Transana development occurs is that people occasionally approach me with particular ideas that they have. And one of the questions I always ask them is, first off, how do you accomplish it? And second off, what's the point? And so I've certainly had information about how one can convert images into a series of numbers. It's never, the part of that particular process that has eluded me is how one derives meaningful information out of that. That yes, you can say that these two images are similar or different from each other. I'm not sure what the point of that exercise is. So if you have a particular type of analysis that you can explain to me, then we can then have a conversation about what it would take to get that implemented into Transana. Most of the features that you've seen, and like the multiple transcript feature, for example, came as a direct result of a particular researcher's analytic need. And she came to me and we talked about it and we settled on that would be the best way for her to do her research. And I implemented that capacity to have multiple transcripts, and now people are using it in all kinds of different ways. Things like Transana has a capacity for multiple simultaneous videos. You can have up to 4 simultaneous cameras. I didn't really get a chance to show that, but that again came out of a specific research need that was presented to me. So if analyzing images, if you can make a case to me about how that's done and how it's useful, then it's certainly something that I would consider adding to Transana. It's not something that I've run across. I haven't heard that need coming from Transana users up to this point, so it's not something I've given a whole lot of thought to.
Okay. Now, one more thing that I wanted to ask you is with reference to one another tool that we use it. What about the field notes? I mean, even for let's say when we are going ahead with the mixed methodologies, do you have a separate way in which we are looking at mixed methodologies also, mixed methodology research I'm talking about, or it is in a similar manner, only you are planning to go ahead with it?
Oh, specifically for mixed methods, there's that analytic data export tool that I talked about earlier. Okay. There, you can call that tool from different places in Transana to get different scopes of your data, but you can export, for example, all of the coding that you've done from a particular source video, or you can export all of the coding that you've done gathered together in a particular collection or set of collections, or you can do all of the data across your entire database, export that into a tab delimited text file that you can then pull into SPSS or SAS or Excel or whatever quantitative tool that you want to use, so that you can always do follow-up on your qualitative analysis, doing additional quantitative analysis. That's the approach I've taken up to this point, rather than embedding a bunch of quantitative stuff into Transana as well.
Right. David, one last question from my side. Social networking platforms are very popular in qualitative research. Does Transana also get linked to YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, all those things also, or no?
In the same way that Transana doesn't handle streaming video, I tend to prefer the model of you acquire the data and then you bring it into Transana, because I don't like it when data I'm trying to look at is under somebody else's control and can disappear from me. I have not put a lot of energy into specifically dealing with the subtleties of social media platforms. There are a couple of tools out there that have really put a lot of effort into analyzing social media data. And so if you're specifically looking at social media stuff, there are probably better tools than Transana out there to use. But those tools are particularly specialized for exactly that application, and I've not pursued adding that to Transana up to this point.
There is one more thing that I was noticing while you were, transcribing the languages. Now you said that it can work on 2 different languages. Have you introduced any of the Indian language also, like Hindi or something like that out here, or only the international?
I know that people have used Transana with languages throughout the world. For the vast majority of the time, Transana really only works with left to right languages. There was a period of time where we supported Arabic, which is a right to left language, but unfortunately our Arabic translator is not able to keep the translation up, and so we've lost that capacity. Transana you can put the interface into a host of languages. These are all done by volunteers. So if there is somebody who's interested in creating a translation for Transana in a particular language, by all means get in touch with me and we can work together to make that happen. But that's in terms of Transana's interface. In terms of the data one puts into Transana, pretty much all right to left languages that you can type on your computer should work with Transana Um, uh, and if you run into particular issues, by all means, get in touch with me. I know that in Turkish, there are a couple of characters that are different in Turkish than they are in the vast majority of Eastern European languages that there were some trouble with, and I had to make some adjustments with. I have not had anybody approach me about specific character or encoding issues about any of the languages that are popular in India. I'm not aware of any issues of them not working, but I would only be aware of that if somebody had tried it and gotten in touch with me. And I can't say that others haven't had troubles. All I can say is nobody's asked me about it.
Thank you, David. I think I had a lot of questions, and that was wonderfully answered, and I really appreciated, David, about it. Other participants, if somebody else also would like to ask him anything, he's there, and you can ask him the question. Otherwise, I can go ahead and I can interact him over the mail, or I can speak to him more about the Transana with him, because I would love to see how the Hindi language is being handled in Transana also. So some of you coming from Nepal, Lal, Rajendra sir, if you would like to ask him certain questions, please go ahead and ask him. Otherwise, David, I will have to get back to you after collecting the questions, and maybe we can, handle those questions in that via meeting.
Yep, you can also go to the website and ask your questions directly.
Yes, absolutely. Fine. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot, David. I really appreciate you giving us some of your valuable time, and I will get back to you also. Okay? Right. Thank you. Yes.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Yes. Good night. In fact, it is going to be 10 o'clock in the night for us. So it would be good night for us, David.
All right. Good night.
Yes. Good night. Take care. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you, all of you. I really appreciate it. And I think we have got certain good things from David. And if you have some questions, he has said you can, either send it to me. I can ask him directly, also side by side. Or if you want to, get back to him over the website, that is also there. However, now we have seen what is the importance of Transana as a research tool and how it is going to be useful in qualitative analysis. So that goes with one tool exclusively meant for, I would say, qualitative analysis or the research. And tomorrow we have got one more person coming in, and you will enjoy that also a lot. I mean, you see, every tool that we are seeing is yes. And I think this particular team, whosoever is present right now, 19 of us are there. So, that is the reason why I asked him that question. And if you think all of us can join up as a team, and we can definitely work in bringing Transana in Hindi language or the other languages of India, and including the translations and the transcription also side by side. That I can take up from him, because I'm in one of his team member. So obviously he cannot say no to me in that way. So I will definitely, be there with him and ask him and get that project wherein all of us can be there together. And that's why I was asking for Bharat, Lal, Rajendra sir also, so that this team, which has started off actually for qualitative research, can be a very good team, and we can come up with one or the other projects as you can roll out. Tomorrow he is coming in. Quirkos is the one that we have got, and you will see, you will enjoy even that part of the introduction to Quirkos through him, and you will understand he's also a very down-to-earth kind of a person, and very much, yes, it is good for a narrative analysis. Yes, and conversational analysis. And he made it very clear. If we talk about discourse analysis, discursive analysis, so thank you, Abhishek, for putting it. And then yes, we can look into that way also. And today he just pinpointed, I think he has given us an overview. Later on, when I'll be inviting him, or maybe me, who knows this tool very well, I will be able to introduce to all of you how the intricacies are being worked upon and how we can really, go ahead. I purposely asked that question, the Hindi one, because I know I can do the analysis. And in data analysis group, majority of the individuals are asking this question, how to go ahead and, work or analyze the Hindi sentences or the other sentences we have got. And now we have got that answer from him also side by side. So you can see what is the importance of Transana from different. So if you are taking some notes or making some notes in your journal, please make it all these points which are there. And somebody who is taking up very seriously, in fact, Abhishek, for you, this is because you're analyzing all the flyers and brochures. So you can see, I purposely raised those questions on image analysis, and he made it very clear what NVivo is doing, correct? Now, remember what he's telling to you, and the recording is also there for each one of you. You can have a look. Right now, it will be good to study corporate in India. Socio-demographic study will be difficult. Yes, that's also right for us. So I think in that way we enjoyed, and it was more a serious kind of a thing, though he has introduced image analysis, video. In fact, I was looking for somebody who can ask. In fact, I will ask him that question as my teacher. Yes, that's right. We can convert in Hindi into English speech conversion software. Yes, sir. Why not, Kanan sir? And this is exactly why I'm going to catch hold of David, for this only, that yes, if transcription, I mean, the entire thing, it's such a costly affair, and he knows it. If he introduces it in India, it would be a very good one. So if some of you are joining me up for this particular part, I will definitely go ahead and yes, feeling changes. Yes. So we can go ahead and we can, at least I can talk to him completely and ask him that, yes, please let us go and do it. So it would be good. And you can showcase that, yes, as a research centers, what we as a team can go ahead and, take up these kind of a work project. These are called as projects for us, and we can look up around us how to go ahead and even take blessings in some form or the other form and get these things also done. Okay, so that's a bingo. So tomorrow, again, I'm not going to take up the class in the morning. So in the evening, again at 8 o'clock. However, I have to talk to the entire participants that, it does not look good if you are there and suddenly you're leaving away, out of the meeting, and, it feels very weird for the person whom we have invited actually. So, I have to tell everybody to be there, and it does not look. Tomorrow, the Quarkus software, you will enjoy it more and see what he has to say. And I'm not going to tell you more about it. While he is showcasing it, try to understand. And after this, I would be requesting Quarkus and Transana members. I know some of the tools are available for us as an open access, and they have given to us. After their talk, it would be rolled out. I will ask even David to give us the access for some time so that we can lay our hand. Tomorrow, what is the time for regular class? No class, Apurva. Tomorrow, only the master class in the evening. This is what we have decided. The day we don't have the master class, I will be taking up in the morning and in the evening also. Okay, in that way. Otherwise, what will happen in the morning? Some of you are there. However, the evening batch is not there. So that is the reason. Okay. So tomorrow, again, by 7:45, I would be opening the link so that even if he's there, he's told me 15 minutes before the session, we would be present. So it would be very good. And then we can carry forward also. Thank you to all of you. Good night. Take care and stay happy and blessed. Bye-bye.